Hello, and in this part 2 IELTS speaking video, I'm going to look at the topic, describe a person who has interesting ideas or opinions. You should say who the person is, what the person does, how you know him or her, and explain why you think his or her ideas or opinions are interesting. This was a very tricky topic for me to do, and I couldn't think of anybody that you might know that has interesting ideas or opinions and I could talk about. I've decided to talk about Walt Disney because I think he had very interesting ideas in terms of his creativity, so you could use this for your answer. If you want to talk about somebody else, that's perfectly fine. It is really difficult, this topic, because it's very specific and it's hard for 2 minutes to talk about somebody's opinions or ideas. Don't worry too much about the content. Remember, this is a test of language, so the IELTS examiner is only interested in the language that you say. So let's take a look at the model answer. I was struggling to decide who to talk about because, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't think of anyone who I'd be able to talk about for 2 minutes. Don't get me wrong, I do have interesting friends, but I wouldn't say they have particularly interesting ideas. So the first person that I thought of outside of my friends and family was Walt Disney. I have to say I'm not a massive Disney fan, so I don't have loads of facts and figures about him, but I am an admirer of his work. Sadly, he is no longer with us. I'm not entirely sure when he passed away, but I'm guessing it was in the 60s. Anyway, he was an American entrepreneur and the pioneer of the animation industry. Like I said, I don't know the exact timeline of when he did things, but he is renowned for being the creator of characters such as Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. He was the producer of many Disney films, and these films are still hugely popular today, so that shows that his ideas had longevity and are still liked by people in the 21st century. As well as being a film producer, he created Disneyland. This is a theme park in LA, and it later expanded to Disney World in Florida and Paris. He produced a magical world, and his attention to detail was second to none. He was an innovator and inspired many. But I think what is absolutely incredible is that even 60 years after his death, his creations have not gone out of date. It is really unbelievable that over half a century after his death, Walt Disney World is still the most visited vacation destination resort anywhere in the world. His imagination knew no bounds, and without him, I don't think we would have films like Toy Story or Frozen. He was a visionary and a trendsetter. So let's take a look at some of the language. I was struggling to decide who to talk about because, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't think of anyone. So you could use this for any IELTS Part 2 question. I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't think of anyone who I'd be able to talk about for 2 minutes, who I would be able to talk about for 2 minutes. Then a very useful little filler phrase, don't get me wrong. And it's like saying, don't misunderstand me. Don't get me wrong. I do have interesting friends, and the use of the auxiliary do to really emphasize and stress. So when you're saying something, but then you don't want to be misunderstood, don't get me wrong, I do have interesting friends. I have to say that, another little useful phrase, instead of saying, I'm not a massive Disney fan. I have to say that. I'm not a massive Disney fan. I'm not a big Disney fan. I'm not a massive Disney fan. I don't have loads. Loads is very informal instead of lots of facts and figures. This just means information and numbers, and it's a collocation that we use, and it can be used in IELTS writing as well. Facts and figures. I am an admirer of his work, so it means I admire him, I like him. Very useful for other topics, such as describe your favourite group, describe your favourite book. I am an admirer of. Sadly, unfortunately, he is no longer with us. In English, we don't like saying he is dead because it's very strong and very cold. So we use lots of euphemisms. These are expressions to express something in a nicer way. He is no longer with us means he is dead. I'm not entirely sure when. Very useful phrase for all of your Part 2 speaking topics. And it means I don't know. I'm not entirely sure when he passed away. This is another way of saying when he died, to pass away. I'm guessing, very useful filler phrase instead of I think. It was in the 60s, in the 1960s. You can use this in IELTS writing as well, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. Anyway, useful little filler phrase to get back to what you're talking about. An American entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is like a business person, somebody who creates things, an inventor, somebody who makes lots of money, and the pioneer of the animation industry. A pioneer is somebody who is the first to do something. So the animation industry, these are like cartoons, and he was the first one to create these kinds of cartoons and films. Like I said, very useful for IELTS speaking. The exact timeline. So I don't know when he did certain things, the time he did certain things. He is renowned for being. He is famous for being. This is very useful, to be renowned for, because you can use it when talking about your hometown. My hometown is renowned for being the birthplace of blah, blah, blah. Somebody who creates things is called a creator, like an inventor. Producer, and he's hugely popular. Instead of saying very popular, you can collocate popular with hugely. Longevity. This means they last for a long time. As well as useful for IELTS writing to show that you understand this structure, because when we follow as well as by a verb, you use an ing form, as well as being, as well as having, as well as doing. It expanded. To expand means to grow, to get bigger. A magical world. Walt Disney created this magical world of Disney World, Disneyland. His attention to detail, a very useful phrase to describe people. And it describes people who focus on the details, who take care and make sure everything is correct and perfect. Second to none. Very useful to describe people as well. And it means if they're second to none, it's like second to no one, so they are the first, they are the best. An innovator, somebody who creates new things. And inspired many. Remember, we can drop the people. Inspired many people. He has inspired many. Absolutely incredible. So you need lots of complex adjectives. Absolutely incredible, absolutely unbelievable. His creations, the things that he created, and they have not gone out of date. So they're still being used today. They're not seen as old-fashioned. It's unbelievable, it's incredible. Vacation, destination, resort, a lot of nouns in there. You could just say holiday destination or holiday resort. To know no bounds. This means there are no boundaries, no limits to what someone or something can do. So you're saying his imagination knew no bounds. It was not limited. It was not controlled. He was a visionary. A visionary is a person who can see new and interesting things. They have a vision. They can see things. And a trendsetter, a person who creates new things and sets trends. He was the pioneer of the animation industry, particularly in America. So this is a word we can use to describe him as a trendsetter. So quite a lot of complex language in here. And like I said, a very tricky topic to talk about for 2 minutes if you're talking about your friend and their interesting ideas. And I think when you start talking about a friend, you don't really think about the complex language as much. So I think it's much easier when talking about somebody like Walt Disney. You can use much more complex language like entrepreneur, innovator, creator, attention to detail, second to none, creations, a visionary, a trendsetter. There is much more complex language that you could use to talk about him. Let's take a look now at a part 3 question connected with this topic. So they may ask you something like, when do children begin to have their own ideas? Oh, I'm not entirely sure because I'm not a child psychologist, but off the top of my head, I think it's when they are still pretty young. 2-year-olds are renowned for having tantrums, and they are called the terrible twos. I think this is because they get annoyed when they don't get their own way. Now, many IELTS Part 3 questions are things that you need to have a degree in psychology to answer. So I would start my answer, I'm not entirely sure because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a child psychologist, and you're getting some complex vocabulary in there off the top of my head. So I'm not maybe going to give a really intelligent answer, but this is the first thing I can think of. When they are still pretty young, pretty is informal, used here to mean quite young. They are renowned for, they are famous for having tantrums. When you see little children lying on the floor like this, we say they're having a tantrum, and it's when it's an uncontrolled burst of anger or frustration. And they get annoyed when they don't get their own way, and it means they don't get to do what they want. Hope you found this video useful. Thank you very much for watching.